At some point, a grown man has to know when a dream is impossible, my father said. And the worst part was that nobody at the table looked surprised. I was 31 years old, sitting in the same dining room where I had celebrated birthdays, graduations, and my first engineering job. But for a few seconds I felt like a teenager being told I had failed a test everyone else had already passed. Dad sat across from me with his coffee untouched beside his plate. Robert Miller was 62, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and still carried himself like the owner of Miller Industrial Supply even on Sunday evenings. My mother, Linda, stared down at the remains of her pot roast. My younger sister Sophie had stopped moving her fork. Dad looked directly at me. 3 years, Ethan. I know how long it has been. Do you? His voice was not loud. Dad almost never needed volume. Because from where I am sitting, you have spent 3 years waiting for something that keeps telling you no. Mom glanced at him. Robert. What? We are all thinking it. I am not, Sophie said. Dad ignored her. You had a good engineering position. Good salary. Health insurance. Retirement match. You were building something solid. I still have a job. Part-time. By choice. Exactly. He leaned back. You chose to cut your hours so you could keep pouring money into a product nobody has agreed to manufacture. That sentence landed because most of it was true. I had reduced my hours. I had used more savings than I ever admitted to my parents. I had spent nights in a rented workshop with Marcus Reed rebuilding a device that had already failed more times than I wanted to count. There had been rejection emails, meetings that went nowhere, a demonstration I still hated remembering. Dad knew enough of those facts to believe he knew the ending. What he did not know was that my telephone had been sitting face down beside my plate for the last 40 minutes because I was waiting for a call from Chicago. Caroline Bennett had told Marcus and me the final decision would come sometime that week. She had not promised Monday. She had not promised Friday. She had only said the review committee was finished and that we would hear soon. That call could mean 3 years of work had finally opened a door. It could also mean another polite rejection. I genuinely did not know. Dad folded his arms. Tell me I am wrong. I looked at him. About what? Tell me this company is working. We are making progress. He gave a tired smile. Progress. That is the word people use when they do not have results. Sophie shifted in her chair. Dad, that is not fair. Fair has nothing to do with it. Rent is real. Insurance is real. Savings are real. So is what I am building. Then where is it? The room went quiet. Mom finally looked at me. There was concern in her face, but not judgment. That almost made it harder. Ethan, she said softly, your father is worried. I know. Dad shook his head. Do not make this about me being worried. I am talking about reality. I could have reached for my telephone. I could have shown him the emails from Caroline, the evaluation schedule, the testing summaries, the photographs from the latest prototype session. I could have told him that people he had never met had spent weeks examining the thing he still called my project. But none of that was a result yet. I had learned that lesson the expensive way. Interest was not commitment. A meeting was not a deal. Encouragement was not funding. And an almost was still a no if nothing came after it. You want reality? I asked. Yes. Then wait for the announcement. Dad stared at me. Sophie looked up immediately. Mom blinked. What announcement? Dad asked. One I cannot talk about yet. A short laugh escaped him. Not cruel. Almost disappointed. Ethan, listen to yourself. I am listening. You cannot talk about it. Not yet. Is that because there is nothing to talk about? Sophie said, Dad. I kept my eyes on him. No, then tell us what it is. I cannot. You mean you will not? Right now, those are the same thing. Dad picked up his coffee, realized it had gone cold, and set it down again. I spent 35 years building a business. Do you know how many people came into my office with big plans and secret opportunities? Probably a lot. Most of them had nothing. Maybe. And the ones who survived learned to stop falling in love with possibilities. I looked at my father and understood something I had been resisting for months. He was not trying to embarrass me. He believed he was trying to save me. That did not make his words easier to hear. It made them harder. If Dad had simply wanted me to fail, I could have dismissed him. But he wanted me safe. To him, safety meant a paycheck every other Friday, medical coverage, a retirement account, and work you could explain without using words like prototype, pilot, or evaluation. Dad had built his entire adult life around certainty. I had spent 3 years betting mine on something that offered almost none. Mom began collecting plates even though nobody had finished eating. Maybe we should leave this alone tonight. Fine, Dad said. Then he looked at me again. But when this announcement does not come, I want you to promise me something. What? That you will finally consider another path. I did not answer. I have a place for you at the company, he continued. A real position. Good salary. Benefits. You could build something there instead of burning yourself out chasing this. I stood and carried my plate toward the kitchen. I appreciate the offer. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have tonight. Sophie followed me into the kitchen a minute later. Is there really an announcement? She whispered. There might be. That is not what you told Dad. I told Dad to wait. Ethan. I looked toward the dining room. The decision has been made. Marcus and I just do not know what it is yet. Sophie's expression changed. So you could still get rejected? Yes. And you said that to Dad anyway? Yes. Why? I dried my hands on a dish towel. Because he already decided what the answer was. My telephone vibrated on the dining room table. Every voice stopped. I walked back in and picked it up. It was not Caroline. Just an automated reminder about my electric bill. Dad gave me a look, but said nothing. I slipped the telephone into my pocket, said good night to Mom and Sophie, and headed outside. The November air was cold enough to sting my face. I sat in my car without starting it. For 3 years, I had imagined what success would feel like. I had never spent much time imagining what happened if the final answer was no. That night, for the first time, I let myself consider it. Dad might be right. The money might be running out. The opportunity might disappear. Marcus and I might have built something useful that still could not become a business. My telephone rested in my hand. No missed calls. No new emails. Nothing from Chicago. I stared through the windshield at the light glowing over my parents' front porch and remembered something Dad did not know. 3 years earlier, before he called my dream impossible, before he started telling me to walk away, he had been the first person who helped me build it. 3 years earlier, Dad had stood beside me in his garage holding a half-inch socket wrench and asking why anyone would pay for something they could already buy at a hardware store. Back then, the question had not sounded like criticism. It sounded like curiosity. I was 28, working full-time as a product engineer for a medical equipment manufacturer outside Columbus, and the idea was still small enough to fit inside a cardboard box on Dad's workbench. It had started 2 weeks earlier during a product evaluation at work. I was observing an occupational therapist named Karen Walsh as she helped a patient named Mr. Bennett test several everyday assistive devices. He had limited mobility in his right hand, and something as ordinary as opening a tightly sealed container required more effort than most people would ever notice. The devices available to him worked, technically, but many were bulky, awkward, or designed around a single task. Mr. Bennett looked at one plastic tool and smiled. It helps, he said, but I would rather not fill my kitchen with 20 different gadgets just to make breakfast. He was joking. I could not stop thinking about it. That night, I sketched an idea for a compact adjustable device that could stabilize and grip several common household objects without requiring much hand strength. It was not revolutionary. At least, I did not think it was. It was simply a problem I could see clearly enough to want to solve. I spent the next Saturday buying hardware, rubber grips, springs, and pieces of aluminum. My first version looked terrible. The second looked worse. When Dad saw the pieces scattered across my condo floor, he asked what I was building. I explained the problem. He listened, then said, "Bring it over Sunday. I have better tools." That was how he became the first person outside work to take the idea seriously. His garage smelled like motor oil, sawdust, and the coffee he always forgot to finish. He had spent decades around industrial equipment and knew more about practical fabrication than most engineers I had worked with. He did not understand every calculation I showed him, but he understood materials. He understood tolerances. More importantly, he understood when something that looked clever on paper would be miserable to manufacture. Too many moving parts, he said after examining my first assembly. Every extra piece is another thing that costs money or breaks. That is encouraging. You want encouragement or help? Help. Then simplify it. We worked until almost 9 that night. Mom brought sandwiches into the garage around 6 and complained that Dad had forgotten dinner again. Sophie stopped by after visiting a friend and laughed when she saw the device. "What is it supposed to be?" "Useful," I said. "That is not an answer." Dad pointed at her. "Leave him alone. He is inventing something." I still remember the way he said it. Not sarcastically, proudly. For the next few months, the project stayed exactly where Dad was comfortable with it. A weekend experiment. I went to work Monday through Friday, contributed to my retirement plan, paid my mortgage, and spent Saturdays testing designs. Dad helped me find suppliers through contacts from Miller Industrial Supply. He gave me scraps of material that would otherwise have been thrown away. Once, he drove nearly 40 miles because a distributor had a type of polymer I wanted to test. When the third prototype finally worked well enough to show Karen, she used it with several volunteers and gave me 3 pages of notes. Most were criticisms. I was thrilled. Someone besides me thought the problem was worth solving. That was when Marcus Reed entered the picture. Marcus and I had gone to engineering school together. He had moved into software development, but he still enjoyed building physical products. I showed him the prototype over lunch. He turned it over in his hands for 10 minutes before saying, "This could be a product." That sentence changed everything. Until then, I had been solving a problem. Marcus made me wonder whether we could build a company around the solution. We started researching the market, manufacturing costs, existing patents, testing requirements, and distribution. The more we learned, the larger the project became. So did the risk. Dad noticed before I told him. One Sunday, he found spreadsheets covering his workbench instead of metal parts. "What is all this? Cost? For what? If we manufacture it?" He stared at me. "You are serious." "I think so." His expression did not change immediately. Serious like selling a few online? Serious like forming a company. That was the first time the garage felt colder than it was. Dad pulled out the stool beside the workbench and sat down. "You have a good job, Ethan." "I know. A very good job. I am not quitting." "Then what are you talking about?" I explained that Marcus and I wanted to develop the product properly, run broader user testing, and eventually approach manufacturers or investors. Dad listened. He asked practical questions. How much would tooling cost? Who carried liability? What would packaging cost? What margin did retailers expect? I had answers for some. Not all. Every unanswered question seemed to bother him more than the last. "You have done enough to know this is complicated," he said. "Yes." "Then keep it on the side. For now." He looked at me. For now. I should have recognized the warning in his voice. Instead, I told him what I had already been considering. If testing goes well, I might reduce my hours at work. Dad stood. No, one word. Immediate. I did not say tomorrow. Does not matter. Dad, I am not asking you to finance it. That is not the point. Then what is? He walked to the workbench and picked up the prototype he had helped me build. This is a good idea. Maybe even a great one. But a good idea is not a paycheck. I know. Do you? He set it down carefully. Because right now you have both. You have a career and you have this. Why would you risk one for the other? I did not have an answer he would accept. The truth was simpler than any spreadsheet. I had started thinking about the project when I woke up. I thought about it during lunch. I thought about it driving home. My job was good, but this felt like mine. Dad saw uncertainty as danger. I saw it as a question I needed to answer. Neither of us understood yet how expensive that difference would become. For another 6 months, I kept everything balanced. Full-time job, nights with Marcus, weekends testing prototypes. Then our first small user study produced better results than we expected. Not perfect, better. Marcus looked at the data and said we needed more time than evenings could give us. I knew he was right. The following Monday, I asked my manager about moving to a reduced schedule. He agreed to 4 days a week. When I told Dad, he did not congratulate me. He did not argue either. He just looked toward the workbench where our earliest prototype still Saturday. "So this is not a hobby anymore," he said. "No," Dad nodded slowly. "Then I hope you understand what you are betting." At the time, I thought he meant money. It took me much longer to realize he meant the life he had spent years teaching me to build. The first time Dad was truly right about my company, I hated him for being right more than I ever hated him for doubting me. About 8 months after I reduced my schedule at work, Marcus and I submitted our device to a startup accelerator in Cleveland that specialized in healthcare and accessibility products. We had spent weeks preparing the application. We had user feedback, cost estimates, early testing data, and a presentation Marcus had revised so many times that he could recite every slide without looking at it. I convinced myself we had a real chance. Dad knew about the application because Mom had mentioned it over dinner, and for once he did not criticize me. "When do you hear?" he asked. "Probably next month." "What happens if you get in?" Mentors, business development support, investor introductions, possibly some initial funding. Dad nodded. That would be something. Those 4 words stayed with me because they sounded almost like approval. When the rejection email arrived on a Wednesday morning, I read it twice before forwarding it to Marcus. The message was polite. They liked the problem we were addressing but questioned whether our product could support a large enough market at the price we would need to charge. Marcus called immediately. It is one accelerator. I know. We keep going. I know. I said the right things, but that night I sat at my kitchen table calculating how much money I had already put into prototypes, testing materials, filing fees, software, travel, and professional consultations. The number was just over $23,000. It was not enough to ruin me. It was enough to frighten me. I had savings, but I was no longer adding to them the way I used to. For days later, Dad asked whether we had heard anything. I told him. He was quiet for a moment. I am sorry. I had expected advice. Instead, he simply said he was sorry. That made me tell him more than I intended. They think the market might be too small. Do you think they are right? I think they might not understand it. Dad looked at me carefully. That is not what I asked. I did not answer. 2 months later, Marcus found an angel investor in Cincinnati who agreed to hear our presentation. We drove down on a rainy Thursday morning with 2 prototypes packed in foam cases and enough confidence to convince ourselves the accelerator had missed something. The meeting lasted 50 minutes. The investor asked good questions. He understood the need immediately. He even complimented the design. Then he passed. His reason was different. Manufacturing complexity. Our projected unit cost was too high, and our margins were too thin. On the drive back to Columbus, Marcus kept talking about redesigning 2 components. I barely heard him. 2 professional evaluations. 2 different reasons. Same answer. No. Dad learned about that rejection too. This time he asked to see our manufacturing numbers. I almost refused, but Miller Industrial Supply dealt with vendors every day, and Dad had spent decades negotiating costs. I brought the spreadsheet to his office on Saturday. He studied it for 20 minutes. Your tooling estimate is too low, he said. We got 3 quotes. For the parts. Not everything around the parts. He pointed at the screen. Quality checks. Packaging changes. Freight. Waste. Returns. Supplier delays. You are budgeting as if every piece arrives perfect and every customer keeps what they buy. These are early estimates. Exactly. He took a calculator from his drawer and started adding numbers. I watched the cost rise. Not dramatically. Enough. At your target retail price, you are leaving yourself almost no room. We can redesign. Then redesign before you spend more money. I went home angry, mostly because Marcus looked at Dad's calculations the next morning and said, he has a point. We spent the next 6 weeks simplifying the mechanism. That version was cheaper. It was also less reliable. During testing, the adjustable grip slipped too often under uneven pressure. Karen was honest about it. The earlier version felt better, she said. This one feels like you designed it for the spreadsheet. I knew exactly what she meant. We had made the product cheaper and worse. By then I was working 4 days a week at my engineering job and spending nearly every evening on the company. I stopped going to the gym. I skipped family dinners when deadlines piled up. My condo became a storage space for prototypes, shipping boxes, and component samples. Sophie came over one Friday and stared at my dining table. Do you ever eat here anymore? The couch works. That was not my question. She opened my refrigerator and found mustard, eggs, leftover Chinese food, and 3 bottles of water. Mom would have a breakdown if she saw this. Then do not show her. Sophie closed the refrigerator. Are you okay? I am busy. That is also not an answer. I laughed, but she did not. A month later, Marcus and I applied for an Ohio Innovation Grant. It was not enormous, but it would have covered another round of engineering and user testing without requiring us to give up equity. We spent nearly 100 hours preparing the application. We made the final review round. Then we lost. I received the notice while sitting in my car outside Dad's office because he had asked me to stop by and look at a supplier sample. I should have gone home. Instead, I walked inside. Dad took one look at me and said, "What happened?" Grant was denied. He leaned against his desk. I am sorry. Third no. Ethan. Accelerator says the market is too small. Investor says manufacturing costs too much. Grant committee says we need stronger validation. Everybody has a different reason. Dad waited. Maybe they are all seeing different pieces of the same problem, he said. I looked at him. Which is, maybe this is harder to turn into a business than you want it to be. I know it is hard. Knowing something is hard, and knowing when it is not working are different things. So I should quit. I did not say that. You did not have to. Dad exhaled. How many people have to tell you no before you listen? That sentence stayed with me. I left without taking the supplier sample. For the first time since Marcus had called the prototype a product, I drove home wondering whether determination and denial could look exactly the same from the inside. That night, I opened our financial spreadsheet and calculated how long I could continue at the current pace. The answer was less than a year. I closed the computer and sat in the dark living room until nearly midnight. The next morning, Karen sent me an email about our latest test. At the bottom, beneath 3 paragraphs of criticism, she had added one sentence. The device is solving the right problem, but I think you are solving it the wrong way. I read that sentence at least 10 times. Then I called Marcus and said, we need to start over. Starting over sounded brave when I said it to Marcus. By the end of the first week, it felt more like admitting we had spent nearly 2 years building the wrong product. We kept the problem and abandoned almost everything else. The adjustable mechanism Dad had helped me refine went into a storage bin. The expensive grip assembly Marcus and I had defended through 3 rounds of testing went with it. We returned to Karen's notes and interviewed 12 people who had used either our prototypes or similar assistive products. This time, instead of asking what they liked about our design, we asked what frustrated them about every device they had tried. The answers were surprisingly consistent. People wanted something simple, discreet, easy to clean, and useful for more than one task. They did not care about the clever mechanism I had spent months perfecting. That realization hurt, but it also freed us. Within 10 weeks, Marcus and I had a completely different prototype. It used fewer components, required less force, and could be manufactured more cheaply than the version Dad had warned me about. Karen tested it with a small group and called me afterward. This one makes sense, she said. For words. That was all. I wrote them on a sticky note and kept it above my desk. For the first time in months, the numbers began moving in the right direction. User completion rates improved. Manufacturing estimates dropped. The device survived repeated testing without the slipping problem that had ruined the cheaper redesign. Marcus built a simple companion application for optional setup guidance, but we deliberately kept the physical product useful without requiring a telephone. We had finally stopped designing for ourselves and started designing for the people who might actually use it. I told Dad almost none of that. Our conversations had changed after the grant rejection. He still asked about work. He still called when he needed help with something on his computer. We still watched Ohio State football together occasionally. But whenever the company came up, both of us became careful. He would ask, still working on the device? I would say yes. Then one of us would change the subject. Mom noticed. Of course she did. You two used to talk about that thing for hours, she said one Sunday. We still talk. About weather and football. Those are safe subjects. She gave me the look mothers perfect after decades of knowing when their children are avoiding something. Your father worries because he loves you. I know. That does not mean he is always right. I know that too. 6 months after we started over, Marcus found a regional innovation event in Indianapolis where early-stage companies could demonstrate products for industry representatives, healthcare organizations, and investors. We applied with the new prototype and were accepted. I should have been excited. Instead, I remembered Cleveland, Cincinnati, and the grant committee. Marcus noticed my hesitation. We need people to see it. I know. Then we go. We spent 3 weeks preparing. Dad found out because Sophie told him. 2 nights before the event, he called. Your mother says you are presenting in Indianapolis. Saturday morning. Can people attend? Yes. We are coming. I almost told him not to. Instead, I said, okay. Saturday morning, Dad and Mom sat in the 3rd row of a hotel conference room with about 80 other people. Marcus stood near our display table. I had practiced the demonstration dozens of times. The first half went exactly as planned. I explained the problem, showed the testing data, and demonstrated 2 common tasks. Then I adjusted the device for the final demonstration. The locking collar failed to seat correctly. I tried again. It slipped. The room did not gasp. Nobody laughed. That would almost have been easier. People simply waited. I made a quick adjustment and finished the demonstration manually, but the moment had passed. During questions, One evaluator asked whether the mechanism had reliability issues. I answered truthfully. We had seen occasional tolerance problems in a recent production sample and were working with the supplier to correct them. Afterward, several people visited our table. Some asked thoughtful questions. 2 requested information. Nobody offered anything concrete. On the drive back to Columbus, Mom sat beside Dad in the front seat while I sat in the back because Dad had insisted on driving. For nearly an hour, we talked about traffic and where to stop for coffee. Nobody mentioned the demonstration. Finally, somewhere west of Dayton, Dad said, "You handled that well." I looked out the window. It should not have happened. Things happen. Not during the 1 5-minute window when people are deciding whether you know what you are doing. Maybe. His voice was gentler than I expected. But you gave it a real shot, Ethan. There is no shame in stopping. I looked at the back of his seat. That sentence hurt more than if he had called me foolish. Dad was not mocking me. He was giving me permission to surrender. And for the first time, part of me wanted to take it. "Robert," Mom said quietly. "What?" I am not criticizing him. He glanced at me in the mirror. "I mean that. You built something. You took it farther than most people ever would. If this is where it ends, you do not have to treat that like failure." I did not answer. When we reached Columbus, Dad dropped me at my condo. The prototype case felt heavier than usual as I carried it upstairs. I placed it on the dining table and left it closed. For 6 days, I did not touch the device. I went to my engineering job, answered emails, paid bills, cleaned my condo, and slept more than I had in months. Marcus gave me space until Friday evening. Then he called. "Are we done?" I stared at the prototype case. "I do not know." "That is fair. What do you think?" "I think I am tired." "Me too. I also think the failure was a supplier tolerance issue, not a design failure. It failed in front of 80 people." "Yes, that matters." "It does." We were both quiet. "Maybe your dad is right," Marcus said finally. Hearing it from him was worse. "Maybe." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began sorting old project emails into folders. I told myself I was organizing them. Really, I was preparing to archive the company. Near the bottom of my inbox was a message I had ignored because I assumed it was another event follow-up. The sender was Caroline Bennett. I recognized her name from the attendee list. She was a partner at a Chicago investment firm that worked with healthcare and accessibility companies. Her message had arrived 3 days earlier. I opened it expecting a polite note about the presentation. Instead, the first sentence made me sit upright. She wrote that she was not interested in what had failed on stage. She was interested in the testing data I had shown before it failed. At the bottom was a simple question. Would Marcus and I be available for a confidential evaluation meeting in Chicago the following week? I read the email twice, then a third time. My hand moved toward my telephone to call Dad. I stopped. For almost 2 years, every piece of hope I had carried home had eventually become another thing I had to explain when it disappeared. I called Marcus instead. He answered on the second ring. "We are not done," I said. Marcus and I drove to Chicago the following Thursday without telling anyone in my family where we were going. I told Mom I had a work commitment. That was technically true, although not in the way she assumed. Caroline Bennett's office was on the 23rd floor of a building overlooking the Chicago River, the kind of place where even the conference room chairs made our folding workshop stools seem embarrassing. I expected a pitch meeting. Caroline gave us something much harder. She asked questions for nearly 3 hours. Manufacturing tolerances, user retention, cleaning requirements, packaging, liability, supplier redundancy, market size, reimbursement possibilities, why our first design had failed, why the second design had failed, why the device that malfunctioned in Indianapolis should be trusted at all. Marcus answered the software and data questions. I handled the physical product. Neither of us tried to hide our mistakes. When Caroline asked why the demonstration had failed, I explained the supplier tolerance issue and showed her the testing records from the previous batch. She studied the numbers. "So you knew there was a potential problem before Indianapolis?" "We knew there was variation. We believed it was still within an acceptable range. And you were wrong." "Yes." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Good." I must have looked confused because she smiled. I am not interested in founders who have never been wrong. I am interested in whether they know when they are wrong. That sentence reminded me of Dad, which was not what I wanted in the middle of the most important meeting we had ever had. At the end, Caroline did not offer us money. She did not shake my hand and tell me we had made it. Instead, she explained that her firm was evaluating several companies for an accessibility commercialization program connected to a manufacturing partner and a group of healthcare organizations. If selected, we would receive technical support, funding for a limited manufacturing run, and access to broader product testing. How many companies are being considered? Marcus asked. I cannot give you that number. How many get selected? Also confidential. I almost laughed. Caroline continued. If you want to proceed, there will be another technical review. We will need detailed cost information, testing documentation, supplier information, and access to your current prototype. When? I asked. Fast. That turned out to mean faster than either of us expected. For the next 5 weeks, Marcus and I lived by deadlines. We rented additional workspace in a small industrial building on the north side of Columbus because my condo could no longer hold everything. I kept my 4-day schedule at my engineering job, then spent evenings and weekends preparing documents, rebuilding test units, and working with suppliers. Caroline's team found weaknesses we had missed. One supplier could not guarantee the tolerances we needed at scale. Our packaging estimate was unrealistic. A cleaning instruction we considered obvious confused several test users. Each problem felt like another chance to be eliminated. We fixed what we could and documented what we could not. I told Dad none of it. That became harder than I expected. He had been part of the project before it was a company. I still had the first crude prototype we built together. More than once, while trying to solve a manufacturing problem, I caught myself reaching for my telephone because Dad knew exactly the kind of supplier who might have an answer. Then I stopped. I did not want to bring him another possibility. I wanted to bring him something real. Mom noticed that I was missing more Sunday dinners. Are you working too much? She asked one evening. Probably. At your regular job? And other things. There was a pause. The company? Yes. Your father thinks you are having trouble letting go after Indianapolis. I closed my eyes. Did he say that? Not exactly. Then what did he say? He said sometimes people keep investing because stopping makes the earlier investment feel wasted. That sounded exactly like Dad. He is describing sunk cost. I do not know what he is describing. I just know he worries about you. I am okay, Mom. Are you? Yes. It was mostly true. I was tired, but for the first time in years, the work felt as if it were moving towards something instead of merely away from rejection. Caroline's team scheduled a second review in Columbus. 3 people came to our workshop. They examined the device, measured components, watched user simulations, and questioned our manufacturing assumptions. Dad happened to call while they were there. I let it go to voicemail. His message was simple. Call me when you get a chance. I have something I want to discuss. I called that evening. Everything all right? I asked. Fine. I want you to come by the office tomorrow. What for? I would rather talk in person. The next afternoon, I sat across from him at Miller Industrial Supply. He pushed a printed sheet toward me. It was a job description, Operations and Product Development Manager. The salary was nearly $20,000 more than I was making on my reduced engineering schedule. Full health coverage, retirement contribution, paid vacation. What is this? I asked, although I already knew. An offer. Dad, read it before you say no. I did. The position was real. So was the salary. He had not invented some meaningless title to rescue his son. You would be good at it, he said. We are expanding 2 product lines next year. I need someone who understands engineering and suppliers. You need someone, or you need me? Both. I placed the paper on his desk. I cannot accept this. His jaw tightened. Why not? Because I am not done. With the device. With the company. He leaned back. Ethan, Indianapolis was over a month ago. I know. Nothing came from it. I almost told him. The Chicago meeting. Caroline. The review team that had stood inside our workshop less than 24 hours earlier. I wanted to watch his expression change. Instead, I remembered every opportunity one had explained before it became another rejection. Something might. Dad shook his head. There is always something that might. This is different. You have said that before. He was right. I had. I am not asking you to believe me. Then what are you asking? Nothing. That seemed to hurt him more than refusal. He looked at the job description between us. I am trying to give you a way forward. I know. A good one. I know that too. Then why are you acting like accepting help means losing? Because this is not the direction I want to go. Dad stared at me for several seconds. How long are you going to keep doing this? I did not answer. Another year? 3. 5. How much money has to disappear before you decide the answer is no? I have limits. I hope so. I stood and folded the job offer once before putting it into my coat pocket. I appreciate it. You are still saying no. Yes. On the drive back to the workshop, guilt sat heavier than anger. Dad had offered me security, responsibility, and a place beside him in the business he had spent most of his life building. I had rejected it for a confidential process that had promised me absolutely nothing. When I arrived, Marcus was standing beside the workbench staring at his laptop. What? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. An email from Caroline filled the page. We had advanced to the final evaluation. There was one line in bold near the bottom. All discussions and decisions remained confidential until the program's public announcement. Marcus looked at me. You still want to keep this from your dad? I thought about the job offer folded inside my pocket. Until it is real, I said. The final evaluation did not feel like a final anything. There was no stage, no applause, and no room full of investors waiting to be impressed. Caroline's team asked Marcus and me to upload revised manufacturing estimates, updated testing data, supplier agreements, and a detailed plan showing what we would do with the first 12 months of funding if we were selected. Then they scheduled 3 video calls and spent most of them questioning our assumptions. By the end of the second call, I had stopped trying to guess whether their questions meant they liked us or were preparing to reject us. Caroline was impossible to read. Your revised manufacturing cost is better, she said during one meeting. But better is not the same as scalable. We have a second supplier evaluating the locking component, I told her. Evaluating is not producing. Not yet. She nodded. Then do not present it as solved. Dad would have liked her. That thought irritated me enough that I almost laughed. Marcus noticed after the call ended. What? Nothing. You made that face. What face? The one you make when your dad says something you know is correct. Caroline sounds like him. Maybe that is why you hate half her questions. I do not hate her questions. Marcus closed his laptop. You hate that she keeps finding places where optimism is doing the work of evidence. I looked at him. You sound like her now. That is because she might write us a very large check. She might help fund a pilot. That is different. Marcus smiled. Look at you learning. We still had no guarantee of anything, but the process was changing me. 3 years earlier, I had believed a strong idea could carry weak business assumptions until I figured them out. Now I understood that the idea was only the beginning. If we could not manufacture consistently, explain the product clearly, support users, manage costs, and survive inevitable problems, then it did not matter how useful the prototype was on my workbench. Dad had been trying to tell me some version of that from the beginning. The part he could not understand was that learning those lessons did not make me want to stop. It made me want to build better. About 2 weeks after we advanced to the final evaluation, Dad called while I was driving home from the workshop. Did you think about my offer? Yes. And my answer is still no. He was silent long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call had not dropped. You did not even counter the salary. It is not about the salary. Then what is it about? I told you. You told me you are not done. That does not tell me what you are waiting for. I tightened my hands on the steering wheel. Caroline had been explicit. No public discussion before the announcement. The companies involved were still being reviewed, and the manufacturing partner controlled the timing. I cannot explain everything right now. Dad sighed. Ethan, every time I ask a direct question, you give me another reason to wait. Then wait. For what? A little longer. You are 31 years old. I should not have to watch you gamble your future on hints. I am not asking you to watch anything. The words came out harder than I intended. Dad became quiet. All right, he said. If that is how you feel. Dad, that is not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant. He ended the call before I could repair it. I sat in my car outside my condo for several minutes afterward. I wanted to call back. Instead, I went upstairs and found the job offer still folded on my kitchen counter. The salary was generous. The benefits were better than what I had on my reduced schedule. More than that, the position represented something I had not allowed myself to think about. Dad was offering me a place in what he had built. He did not offer positions like that casually. Saying no was not just rejecting employment. To him, it probably felt like rejecting him. The next Sunday, I went to Mom and Dad's house determined not to discuss the company. Sophie was there helping Mom prepare dinner. Dad was in the den watching football. He greeted me normally, which somehow made the tension worse. We made it through most of dinner talking about Sophie's school, Mom's plans for Thanksgiving, and a customer issue Dad had dealt with at work. Then Mom asked the question I had hoped she would avoid. Ethan, did you decide about your father's job offer? Dad put down his fork. Linda, what? I am asking. He decided. Sophie looked at me. You said no? Yes. Mom's expression fell. Why? Because I am still working on the company. Dad leaned back. There it is. Robert, please. No, I want to understand. He had his demonstration. It did not go the way he wanted. I offered him a good position. He says no because something might happen that he cannot explain. Sophie looked at me. Is something happening? Yes. Dad laughed softly. Apparently. I cannot talk about it yet. You keep saying that. Because it is true. Or because as long as there is always one more possibility, you never have to admit this is not working. That hit harder than I wanted it to. You think I have spent 3 years avoiding reality? I think you have spent 3 years moving the finish line. That is not the same thing. From here, it looks exactly the same. Mom tried to interrupt, but Dad continued. I helped you build the first version of that thing. I wanted it to work. Do you understand that? I wanted you to prove there was something there. But there comes a point when supporting someone means telling him what he does not want to hear. And what exactly is that? Dad looked directly at me. That you are wasting years of your life on something that may never become what you want it to be. The table went silent. Sophie stared at her plate. Mom said his name quietly. Dad did not look away from me. You have talent, Ethan. You have options. I do not understand why you are refusing to use them. I felt my telephone vibrate in my pocket. Once. Then again. I left it there. Maybe you will understand soon, I said. Dad shook his head. Another maybe. I finished dinner without saying much more. When I finally stepped outside, I checked my telephone under the porch light. There was an email from Caroline. The subject line said final decision and confidentiality. My thumb hovered over the screen before I opened it. The first paragraph confirmed that the committee had completed its review. The second told Marcus and me that a final decision had been made. Then came the sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. We were not permitted to disclose the result until the official public announcement. I read the email again, searching for the words that would tell me whether we had won or lost. They were not there. A separate call was scheduled for Monday morning. Behind me, the front door opened. Dad stepped onto the porch. Everything okay? He asked. I locked the screen. I will know tomorrow. Monday morning, Marcus arrived at the workshop 20 minutes early carrying 2 coffees and looking as if he had not slept. I had not slept much either. Caroline's call was scheduled for 9:30 Eastern Time, and by 9:15 we had already checked the internet connection twice, opened every document we might possibly need, and argued about whether the camera angle made the workshop look professional or desperate. If she is calling to reject us, none of this matters, Marcus said. Helpful. I am trying to lower expectations. You are doing excellent work. At 9:29, the video call appeared on my laptop. Caroline was alone. That immediately made me nervous. I had expected a committee, maybe someone from the manufacturing partner. She greeted us, asked whether we could hear her, and then spent almost a minute discussing administrative details before getting to the reason for the call. I wanted to reach through the screen and ask her to skip ahead. Finally, she folded her hands. The review process is complete. Marcus stopped moving. Your company has been selected to participate in the Accessibility Commercialization Program. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Caroline smiled. That is normally the part where people say something. Marcus leaned toward the camera. Selected as in selected? Yes. I laughed before I could stop myself. Sorry. Do not apologize. You were in the moment. She explained what came next. The program would provide funding for a limited manufacturing pilot, engineering support from the manufacturing partner, expanded user testing through participating organizations, and business development assistance. It was not enough money for Marcus or me to quit everything and pretend we had become successful overnight. It did not guarantee a national launch. It did not guarantee customers. It did not even guarantee the product would survive the next stage. What it gave us was something we had spent 3 years trying to reach, a real path from prototype to market. There is one condition I need to emphasize, Caroline said. The public announcement is scheduled for next week. Until the partner releases it, you cannot disclose your selection outside the people covered by the process. I thought immediately of Dad. Family counts as outside. Caroline gave me a knowing smile. Unless your father signed our confidentiality agreement, yes. Marcus looked at me. That is unfortunate. Caroline raised an eyebrow. I assume there is a story there. A long one, I said. After the call ended, Marcus stood and stared at me. Then he looked around the workshop at the shelves of failed prototypes, shipping boxes, test fixtures, and component samples. We got in. We got in. Say it like you believe it. We got in. He laughed. I did too. For maybe 30 seconds, 3 years of rejection disappeared. Then Marcus looked at the clock and said, I have a meeting in 40 minutes. Reality returned immediately. We were still 2 men with jobs, bills, deadlines, and a company that had just earned the right to face larger problems. I spent the rest of Monday answering program paperwork. I did not call Dad. That was harder than I expected. I had imagined this moment countless times, and in most versions I told him immediately. Instead, I waited. On Wednesday, Mom called to confirm Sunday dinner. Your father wants everyone here. Why? Do we need a reason now? With Dad, usually. She laughed. Sophie is coming. 6 o'clock. I agreed. By Sunday, keeping the news from my family felt ridiculous. Sophie knew something was happening because I had become terrible at pretending nothing had changed. When I arrived at my parents' house, she caught me alone near the kitchen. You look different. How? Less miserable. Thank you. Did something happen? Yes. Her eyes widened. Good. Yes. Tell me. I cannot yet. She stared at me. You are impossible. Apparently. Dinner started normally. Mom served pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and rolls. Dad talked about a supplier problem at work. Sophie complained about paperwork at school. I kept waiting for someone to ask about the company. Nobody did until Mom mentioned the job offer. Robert, did Ethan ever give you a final answer? Dad looked at me. He did. And? Sophie asked. He turned it down. Sophie glanced toward me. Still, I said. Dad set down his fork. I have been thinking about that. I already knew where the conversation was going. Dad, hear me out. I heard you the first time. Then maybe hear me differently. He spoke calmly, which made every word heavier. I am not asking you to give up because I think you are incapable. I am asking you to recognize when persistence stops being courage. Mom said, Robert, this does not have to happen tonight. Actually, I think it does. He looked at me. You have spent years on this. You have spent your savings. You reduced your career for it. The demonstration in Indianapolis did not lead anywhere. I almost corrected him. I did not. You keep telling us something is happening, but you never say what. Because I cannot. That is convenient. Sophie interrupted. Dad, maybe he really cannot. Then what am I supposed to evaluate? Hints. You do not have to evaluate anything, I said. Dad's expression hardened. I am your father. I know. And I have watched you build your life since you were old enough to make choices. That does not mean every choice belongs to you. I did not say it did. Then let me make this one. Dad leaned back and studied me. At some point, a grown man has to know when a dream is impossible. The words were almost identical to what he would later repeat in my memory for months. Mom looked down. Sophie stopped eating. I felt the old urge to explain everything. Chicago. Caroline. The final review. The Monday call. The manufacturing pilot. I could have ended the argument with one sentence. Instead, I remembered the confidentiality agreement. More importantly, I remembered every time I had brought Dad an unfinished possibility and watched it become another reason for him to doubt the next one. Then wait for the announcement, I said. Dad stared at me. What announcement? One I am not allowed to make yet. He gave a quiet laugh. Of course. You asked what I am waiting for. That is your answer. And when is this mysterious announcement supposed to happen? Soon. Another word that means nothing. Then you will not have to wait long. Dad shook his head. 6 months from now, you are going to wish you had listened to me. I could hear Mom inhale as if she expected me to argue. I did not. Maybe. Dad looked almost disappointed by the answer. That is it. That is it. We finished dinner with the conversation hanging over the table. When I left, Sophie followed me to the driveway. Whatever you are hiding, I hope it is worth this. So do I. You said something good happened. It did. Then why do you look nervous? I glanced at my parents' house. Because getting selected does not mean we succeed. Sophie's eyes widened. I realized too late what I had said. Selected for what? I opened my car door. You did not hear that. Ethan. Next week. She folded her arms. I hate you. No, you do not. I drove home smiling for the first few miles. Then the smile faded. Dad believed the argument was about whether I could prove him wrong. It was not. Caroline had given us funding for a pilot, not a guarantee. The product could still fail. Manufacturing could still go wrong. Customers could still say no. For the first time, though, I understood that I did not need certainty to continue. I needed enough evidence to justify the next step. On my kitchen table, the folded job offer from Dad was still where I had left it. Beside it, my laptop showed the confidential program schedule. The public announcement was set for Thursday morning. For days away, Thursday morning arrived with none of the drama I had imagined. There was no countdown, no conference room, and no telephone call from Caroline. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 7:20 with coffee and my laptop, refreshing the manufacturing partner's website, even though the announcement was not scheduled until 9. Marcus texted me at 7:31. "You awake?" I replied, "Unfortunately." At 8:12, Sophie sent, "I still remember what you accidentally said Sunday." I wrote back, "You remember nothing." She answered, "Selected." I ignored her. At 8:45, I drove to the workshop because Marcus insisted we should be together when the announcement went live. He had brought donuts neither of us touched. At 8:58, we opened the program page. At 9, nothing changed. At 9:03, still nothing. "Maybe they forgot," Marcus said. "That seems likely." At 9:11, a notification appeared on my telephone from a regional business publication I followed. The headline mentioned the Accessibility Commercialization Program. My stomach tightened. I opened it before Marcus could stop me. The article highlighted a Cincinnati company that had been selected for a manufacturing partnership. Their product was completely different from ours, but I barely processed that. I saw the program name, the word selected company, and another founder's photograph. "What?" Marcus asked. I turned the telephone toward him. He read the headline. "That is not us." I noticed. Maybe they selected more than one. Maybe. Caroline said companies. She also refused to tell us how many. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The certainty I had carried since Monday suddenly felt embarrassing. I opened Caroline's email again. "Our company has been selected to participate." The sentence had not changed. Still, my mind started looking for explanations. Maybe we had been selected for evaluation, but not funding. Maybe the wording meant something different. Maybe the program had changed. Marcus grabbed his laptop and searched the Cincinnati company. "Wait. What?" "They are in mobility technology." "So, we are daily living accessibility." "Different category." "Does the program have categories?" "I think so." "You think?" Before he could answer, my telephone vibrated. "Dad." I stared at his name. "Are you answering?" Marcus asked. "I do not know." The call stopped. A message appeared seconds later. I saw the announcement. "I am sorry. We can talk whenever you are ready." I read it twice. Dad had seen the same article and reached the same conclusion. He thought I had lost. What surprised me was that there was no lecture. No reminder about the job offer. No version of "I told you so." Just 4 words that mattered more than I expected. "I am sorry." I started typing a response, then deleted it. At 9:19, Caroline called. I answered immediately. "Good morning," she said. "I assume you are watching the rollout. We saw an article about another company." "Yes. Their regional publication posted early." "So what does that mean for us?" Caroline laughed softly. "It means their regional publication posted early." I closed my eyes. "That is all. Ethan, you were selected. I told you that Monday." "I know, but the article made it look like they were the company." "They are a company. There are multiple program tracks." Marcus heard enough through the speaker to lean back in his chair. "Our announcement is still happening?" he asked. "In approximately 20 minutes. The partner is staggering the releases by category." I felt foolish and relieved at the same time. Caroline continued. "Your company is one of 3 projects entering the daily living accessibility track. Your pilot funding and manufacturing support are exactly what we discussed. Nothing has changed." "Thank you." "You are welcome." "And Ethan?" "Yes. Try not to build an entire failure story from one headline next time." "I will work on that." When the call ended, Marcus finally ate a donut. "Your dad texted you?" "He thinks we lost." "Are you going to tell him?" I looked at the clock. Not yet. At 9:41, the program page updated. Our company name appeared beneath the heading for Daily Living Accessibility. There was a photograph of our device, a short description of the pilot, and a quote from Caroline about practical design and user-centered development. Beneath that was the part that made everything feel real. The program would support a limited manufacturing run, expanded field testing, and commercial preparation over the following 12 months. I read every word slowly. There was no promise of millions. No claim that we had changed the industry. No guarantee our company would exist 5 years from now. But our work was no longer confined to my condo, Dad's garage, or a rented workshop. An outside organization had examined our failures, our numbers, our product, and our plan, then decided the next step was worth funding. Marcus stood beside me. Take a picture. Of what? The screen. It is a website. It will still be there. Just take the picture. I did. Then my telephone began vibrating. Sophie called first. I answered. You got selected. Apparently. Do not apparently me. I am looking at your name. Our company's name. Same difference. Not really. Mom is calling me. Dad is probably reading it right now. That thought made me stop smiling. How do you know? Because Mom sent me the link 30 seconds ago. After we hung up, I waited for Dad to call. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Mom texted 3 exclamation points followed by, call me when you can. Dad said nothing. At 10:15, I finally opened his earlier message and replied, you saw the wrong announcement. Ours just went live. The typing indicator appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, appeared again, disappeared. Finally, his response came. I see it. Nothing else. Marcus read my face. Not exactly the celebration you expected? I do not know what I expected. At noon, Mom called. She was crying enough that I had to tell her twice that this was only a pilot program and not a national launch. I know, she said. Let me be proud anyway. Sophie took the telephone from her and demanded to know why I had kept everything secret. Somewhere behind them, I could hear Dad speaking, but I could not make out the words. He still did not come to the telephone. That afternoon, 2 local business reporters emailed us. Karen sent a message saying she had already shared the announcement with several colleagues. My manager at the engineering company congratulated me and asked whether my schedule would need to change eventually. Every new message made the selection feel more real. Yet the one person I kept waiting to hear from remained silent. At 6:30, while Marcus and I were cleaning the workshop, a vehicle pulled into the small parking lot outside. I recognized Dad's pickup through the window. He had never been to this workshop. I had never invited him. He got out carrying something long and wrapped in an old blue shop towel. When he walked inside, he looked past me at the shelves, test fixtures, prototypes, and boxes labeled for the upcoming pilot. For once, he did not have a question ready. He placed the wrapped object on the workbench and pulled back the towel. It was the first crude prototype we had built together in his garage 3 years earlier. Found this on my shelf, he said. Then he looked at the finished device sitting 6 feet away. I thought you might want it back. Dad stood beside the workbench with the first prototype between us, and for a moment I could see both versions of our relationship in the same room. The crude device he had helped me build 3 years earlier was scratched, uneven, and held together with hardware we had bought at a local store. 6 feet away sat the version Marcus and I were preparing for the manufacturing pilot. It was smaller, cleaner, easier to use, and different enough that someone might never guess one had become the other. Dad picked up the finished device carefully. This is lighter. Almost 40%. Fewer parts. A lot fewer. He turned it over. What happened to the adjustable assembly? We removed it. Dad looked at me. The part you spent a year defending? That part. A faint smile appeared. Must have hurt. More than I would like to admit. He placed the device back on the bench. Marcus quietly announced that he needed to check inventory in the storage room. Although both of us knew he was giving us privacy. Dad walked slowly around the workshop. He examined the test fixtures, labeled component bins, supplier samples, and a whiteboard covered with manufacturing tasks. I thought you were still doing most of this in your condo. I was until about 6 months ago. Why did you never tell me about this place? You stopped asking questions you wanted real answers to. He turned toward me. What does that mean? You would ask whether I was still working on the company, but you were not really asking about the company. You were asking whether I had stopped yet. Dad looked down at the workbench. That is fair. I had prepared myself for disagreement. His answer took some of the anger out of me. He touched the old prototype. Were you trying to prove me wrong? No, it felt like you were. I was trying to find out if I was right. He looked at me. There is a difference. A big one. I pulled a stool from beneath the bench and sat down. If I had been trying to prove you wrong, I would have kept defending every bad decision just because you criticized it. I did not. You were right about our manufacturing costs. You were right that I underestimated how complicated this would be. You were right that I was spending too much money before we understood the business. That is a surprisingly long list. Do not enjoy it too much. Dad smiled, but only briefly. Then why did you keep going? I pointed toward the finished device. Because being wrong about how to build it was not the same as being wrong about the problem. Dad sat on the stool opposite me. I told him about Karen's feedback, the redesign, the testing, Caroline's email after Indianapolis, and the confidential evaluation process. I told him about Chicago and the final review. When I finished, Dad was quiet. You went to Chicago and did not tell me. Yes. Why? Because I could not keep bringing you possibilities and then defending myself when they disappeared. You thought I wanted them to disappear? No. I thought every rejection made you more certain I should stop. He rubbed a hand over his gray hair. Maybe it did. That is why I waited until there was something real. Dad looked across the workshop. I owe you an apology. I had imagined hearing those words. In my imagination, they felt like victory. In reality, they made me uncomfortable. You do not have to say that because of the announcement. I am not. He paused. I was wrong to call what you were doing a waste. You were worried. I was more than worried. His voice changed. Do you remember much about your grandfather's business? Not really. I was little. You were 5 when it closed. I knew Grandpa Miller had once owned a small machine shop, but Dad rarely discussed it. He expanded too fast, Dad said. Borrowed against the house. Bought equipment because he was sure new contracts were coming. Then the contracts did not come. I listened. For a while, every dinner at home was about money. What could wait? What had to be paid? What might happen next? Your grandmother went back to work full-time. Your grandfather spent years recovering. You never told me that. There was nothing useful to tell. Maybe there was. Dad nodded slowly. Maybe. He looked at the old prototype again. When you started talking about reducing your hours and putting savings into this, I did not see you. I saw him. The sentence settled between us. Suddenly the job offer, the questions about savings, and his obsession with security fit together differently. You thought I was repeating his mistake. I was afraid you might. So you tried to stop me before you knew whether I was. Yes. He did not defend it. That mattered. Dad, I can understand why you were scared. But I cannot build my life around what happened to Grandpa. I know. And this program does not mean you were wrong about every risk. I know that too. We could still fail. Dad looked at the finished device. Do you believe that? Of course. You do not sound afraid of it. I am. I just know more now about what failure would actually mean. Which is, if the pilot does not work, we learn why. If the economics do not work, we change them or stop. If users do not want the product, then we accept that. But I needed evidence before I walked away. Not fear. Dad nodded. That sounds annoyingly reasonable. I learned from an annoying person. He laughed, and the tension finally loosened. Then he picked up the finished device again and studied one component near the base. Who was making this piece? A supplier outside Dayton. At pilot volume? That is the plan. What are they charging? I told him. His eyebrows rose. For that, do not start. I am asking. You are judging. I can do both. I laughed despite myself. Dad reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. I know a supplier near Toledo that works with similar polymers. Good tolerances. Smaller runs. He placed the card on the bench but kept his hand over it. I am not telling you what to do. That must be difficult. Extremely. He slid the card toward me. I am saying you might want a second quote. I picked it up. I might. Dad stood to leave, then stopped beside the old prototype. Keep that one. I thought you brought it back for me. I did. Then why are you telling me to keep it? Because someday you might need to remember how bad your first idea was. Thanks, Dad. He smiled. Or how far it got. After he left, I placed the old prototype on the shelf above my workbench instead of putting it back into storage. The announcement had not transformed my company into a success. It had not erased the money I had spent, the rejections, or the mistakes Dad had correctly warned me about. What changed was smaller and more important. Dad no longer needed certainty before respecting my decision, and I no longer needed his approval before making it. 2 weeks later, we requested a quote from the supplier near Toledo. Their price was lower. Dad never said he had told me so. I never told him that his contact saved our pilot budget several $1,000s. We both knew. The following Sunday, when I walked into my parents' house for dinner, Dad did not ask whether I had finally found a real job. He asked how the pilot was going. For the first time in years, it felt like an actual question.